What happens when you combine the shell of a hardcore fantasy MMORPG with the trappings of a hardcore survival game? We just found out with New World, Amazon Games' colonial-themed MMO that plops you and other human survivors onto a cursed island where you must gather, craft, and fight for the dominion of one of 3 competing factions. It's visually gorgeous, and its ideas for a player-driven economy are bold. Yet, coming away from over 170 hours spent reaching the level cap and exploring the endgame content, it comes together as a thoroughly unremarkable game, thanks to a needlessly drawn-out grind with not enough variety or swashbuckling to sustain it. The premise of New World is pretty simple. You're a pirate shipwrecked on a mystical island called Aeternum, which is rumored to be full of treasures. This is all a thinly veiled excuse to go out and plunder everything you see, and no time's wasted in teaching you how to cut a direct swath through its breathtaking wilderness. Get used to it, because you'll be doing a lot of this, and this before you even clear the very first zone, and then you'll do it some more. There is action combat, of course, and it feels especially slick in the initial few battles. For instance, enemies are way more reactive than in other MMORPGs, often dodging and darting around you. It forces you to stay on your toes at all times. Since there's no tab targeting system, you need to aim each of your attacks, so the timing of a particular attack or dodge roll can make or break a fight. This would be exhilarating if it were built upon from there, but it drops the ball in that there isn't all that much variation to how your character plays over time as you level up. Questing on Aeternum is sure to put that combat system through its paces, but by the end, it's far preferable to sail off to some other distant shores. What begins as an interesting battle for survival against the island's ancient undead guardians, dryads, and the odious otherworldly corruption rapidly devolves into a mad dash to gather the most resources. The reward for all of that effort is getting to watch your numbers go up at a tick so slow that it makes progress in Pokemon Go feel speedy. On top of that, when you've gathered plenty of one specific material, there's no knowing when the corresponding town project that requires it will appear at your local settlement's town project board to scoop them up in exchange for a major payoff of XP. Sure, you can find plenty of lore scrolls that vaguely tell you what's going on, but NPCs themselves are sparse, and their quests are almost always written with no more enthusiasm than, "Go here and kill 10 rats because I said so." It's nice that the main quest at least forces people to cooperate for a few dungeons, but it still ends on a note so forgettable that you can blink and miss it entirely. Just a short conversation with a throwaway character after all of that? Really?
I do confess, I have heard horror stories from the Great Cleave.
In its favor, Aeternum is a massive, sprawling island. There are a ton of zones, each with their own flavor and scenery drawing inspiration from different real-world cultures. And it's cool that some of these points of interest can climb into the sky, giving Aeternum a surprising sense of scope and scale, especially when you're visiting, for one example, Ebonscale Reach's Mountain Temple area. But even that gets old after a while, and it's frustratingly inconvenient that fast travel is limited to a very select group of points on the map. Because you're forced to spend a scarce resource when using it, you'll often find yourself hoofing it from place to place. Sure, this makes Aeternum feel spacious, but it's exacerbated by the fact that there are no mounts to speed up your pace. After enough of these long treks, it becomes apparent that very few of these spectacular locations have any unique personality. Really, they serve as themed set dressing for cookie-cutter areas stocked with the same reused monsters and loot containers every time. There is at least some light at the end of the leveling tunnel. Starting at 50, you can functionally participate in the faction conflicts and community-based rivalries that paint the backdrop of much of what's been going on around you. But you're heavily encouraged to hold off until 60. Meanwhile, there's enough consistent fun to be had with the Outpost Rush mode that it's really confusing why Amazon Games decided to lock that behind so many hours of grueling grinding. These 10 to 30 minute PvPvE skirmishes between up to 40 players across the entire server give decent rewards, and are easy to jump into. But a lot of people will probably give up long before they get to level 60 and unlock it. It's also quite cool that the overarching metagame pits each of the 3 player factions against each other in a competition over who owns and operates each of 11 conquerable zones across the world map. But it goes a little too far in that this also determines the quality of life for everybody on that server, even down to tax rates. Based on who's in charge, you might be getting a raw deal, and until you hit level 60, it's basically taxation without representation. In fact, these intertwining trade skill systems and player-driven economies can be downright chaotic. For instance, because there are no NPCs dishing out money for items you collect like in most MMOs, the main currency, coin, is extremely hard to find right now. As a result, trading stalls experience wildly fluctuating prices across all settlements on all servers, making it increasingly difficult to sell things. Nobody knows what a reasonable price for anything even is. As far as dungeons go, there aren't as many available as in other MMOs of this size, but the gorgeous Dynasty Shipyard and challenging Starstone Barrows make an interesting distraction from the grind. However, the lack of matchmaking makes it easy to play those once and then forget they're there. There are only so many times people are going to want to sit around and type LFG into a chat window until they find a party with the required tuning orb, or put in the work to create one themselves. New World asks for the same quantity of time investment as any other traditional style MMO, which means it desperately needs far, far more story content and gameplay variety to fill the gaps in its massive and visually gorgeous yet otherwise unremarkable world. The PvP endgame is where things really start to get interesting, but the grind to get there is just mind-numbing. The quests are hyper-repetitive, and the combat, while fun in the opening hours, gets boring even after the first 50 hours spent hacking away. You and your friends can absolutely have some good adventures here, but it's conditional on your willingness to endlessly grind and harvest materials, as well as on the health of your server's community and its ongoing faction-driven rivalries. What's left in the absence of that is a candy-coated shell of an MMORPG that struggles to evolve past its opening. But hey, at least you can pet the dog. For more on New World, check out our rundown of 20 things to know before you start, and tips for what to do once you hit max level. And for everything else, stick with IGN.